Welcome to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Dan Dunn. We are going to discuss presidential campaign rhetoric. Dan is a professor of communication at Purdue University Calumet. He earned his PhD at Wayne State University in communication. He won awards for teaching throughout his career, and he's co-author of Communication Embracing Difference with Lisa Goodnight. It's in its 4th edition, published by Pearson. Dan has also taught in the Management Development Program at Harvard University in 2007. Dan's main class at Purdue University is Rhetoric and Social Influence, and he has a track record of predicting presidential elections going back to 1988. So we'll get to that at some point in the discussion here. But first, Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Tom.
Good to have you. Let's get started. Our focus will be, I suppose, mainly on the rhetoric that these candidates are producing and how well they're delivering that. Shall we start with some of the easier ones before we get on to Donald Trump and
Sure.
and Mr. Carson and Dr. Carson? On the Democratic side, right? If we look at Bernie and Hillary, how do you assess them?
Well, I think that Hillary had an amazing run between the Benghazi hearings and the debate. And in that debate, Bernie Sanders did her a great favor. And one of the things with Bernie Sanders is he's spontaneous and he sometimes can get emotional. And I remember him standing up, and then you see, I'm tired of hearing about these emails, you know, and that was really good for her. And it was really interesting because one of his advisors then said, you know, he praised, initially he said, you know, I wish he hadn't done it. Then he goes on the talk shows the next day and he says, well, it was actually a good thing that he did that. So he tried to spin it.
When he went on the talk shows?
Absolutely. He was honest, I think, initially, but then once he got on the talk shows, and that's what they all do.
Well, let me just challenge that for a second. I mean, might it not have been good for Bernie to do that in terms of his own character? Because we know that, you know, according to some of the research anyway, right, the thing that speaks best for our own character is when we do something that's against our own best interests, right? And so he was taking a stand on a principle there, and the principle being, I think, my interpretation, but the principle being that we should be talking about the issues and not, you know, quarreling about who said what when. And so I personally respected him a little bit more for doing that, although I think you're also right. I think it also helped Hillary.
Yeah, it did. It really did. She had, because every one of these campaigns goes through a time period where they're pushed a little bit, especially if they're front runners. You know, if we go back to 1980 with Ronald Reagan in the Iowa caucuses, he didn't spend a whole lot of time there, and then and Bush beat him. Bush 41.
Right.
And so you and I can probably remember back then. I don't know that our students can, but during
the voodoo economics.
But then he thinks, I've got all this momentum, you know, and he's running through airports, assuming he's like O.J. Simpson using one of those commercials.
Right.
So we get to, and everybody's
We're
saying.
We're referring to the good O.J., everybody, not the.
Right.
Right.
And everybody thought that Reagan was in real trouble. And so his campaign runs into difficulty, but then he gets a moment when he has this agreement to debate Bush one-on-one. And there were a lot of candidates, and he thinks, well, that's not a good idea. You know, it's not fair to the other candidates. And also, more candidates, fewer questions.
Right.
And so there's this scene where Bush will not change the terms.
Right.
And Reagan says, well, I'm going to go tell them, you know, I'm going to walk out. And Nancy says, no. You'll all walk out. And they're all sitting on the stage, and you see.
I didn't know this was Nancy's idea.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
it is. It was.
Yeah.
You see them all sitting on the stage, and Bush is very uncomfortable non-verbally.
Yeah.
And then the moderator, Reagan wants to talk, and the moderator says, his name was Mr. Breen, he says, please turn off Governor Reagan's microphone. And this becomes the soundbite of all that. Reagan stands up, just a minute, Mr. Green, gets the guy's name wrong. I paid for this, Mike. The crowd cheers, and Bush's image he got this image as being weak and a wimp.
Yeah, the
right.
wimp image, right.
That didn't change until his interview with Dan Rather in 1988.
Right,
so, you got to be really careful about what the media does, And I think these candidates have they have pre-planned lines.
Sure.
When you see these debates, they're not really debates, okay? I'll do one more, and then I want to give you a chance.
No, that's okay. We're here to hear your take on this.
Okay.
I do not have your track record at predicting what's going on here. I thought when you were talking about Reagan, Bush, I thought there's no way Reagan even wins the primary, let alone president. And I assured everybody that was the case.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there was a line, with the debate with Carter, the second debate, because in '80. Carter refused to go to the first debate because he didn't want to sit with John Anderson.
Right.
And so at the second debate, Reagan's got this.
Anderson, it probably cost him the election.
Because the Anderson votes were more geared towards Carter.
Oh, yeah.
So he didn't want him on the stage.
Yeah.
And then Carter gets up and he's talking about Reagan's record, and Reagan looks at Carter and says, "There you go again, Mr. President." And Carter foolishly says, I was talking to my daughter, Amy. Okay, at that time, she was 8 years old. And I remember when my daughter was 8, okay? And he says, what are you most concerned about? I'm concerned about nuclear proliferation.
Right.
I remember the discussions I had with my daughter when she was 8.
Right.
Dad, I love you so much, but I would even love you more if you buy me a toy. So that's not the kind of behavior that you would expect. And then Reagan at the end of the debate, and I know that this was Gergen, one of his advisors, scripted this. He said, if you're better off where you are now, I think you know how you should vote. And we had runaway inflation.
Of course, everybody's used that line since then. Yeah, very popular.
And Gergen wrote it. And the thing about Reagan, Reagan was his best when he was Reagan.
Yeah. If I could just insert for a second. Sure. So all of these examples that Dan's giving us are examples where the candidates were interfacing with the media over the rules of the debate, essentially, right? Which is something that might be called third face of power. It's to adjust the rules in order to influence the outcome. And so Sanders did this a little bit by getting Benghazi off the table, which helped.
But I do understand what you're saying, but that he was being himself. The difficulty that I think he will have is he needs to broaden his base. He is seen somewhat as I don't want to say a single issue candidate, but his whole theme centers around economic inequality, which is a good theme.
Well, it does,
but it has to be broader.
So, yes, I get that. I think that's really the key thing.
He actually. Go ahead. Sorry.
But every year when we analyze, a campaign, right, we tend to look at it and say, well, this candidate shouldn't have said this. Dukakis should have said he would have killed the person who raped his wife, right, and all of that stuff. But in the case of Bernie Sanders, is it possible that no matter what he says, no matter how he says it, he's still too liberal to be elected? Isn't that a factor?
Yep. I think that in my head, campaigns are one in the middle.
Yeah.
You will either be, if the country is a little bit right of center, and that's what happened in 1980.
Yeah.
Reagan didn't look as conservative as he was. If the country is a little bit left of center, that's what happened in 1964. That made Goldwater look like an extremist. And when you think about it,
Goldwater was in reality an extremist?
but if you think about it,
yes.
Well, Goldwater was a true believer.
Yeah, he was.
I remember his theme in the California primary in 1964. Yeah. His theme was a choice, not an echo, meaning I'm a man of principle.
Yeah.
Rockefeller's theme was keep America in the mainstream, meaning I'm normal, he's not. So he was kind of out there.
It's a good argument, I think.
But the country was left of center, and he was such a purist that he did not, at his convention, you would think he would look for a little balance on his ticket.
Yeah.
But he picked Bill Miller, who was as far to the right as he was.
Yeah.
And so elections are one, I think, in the middle, and you're either a little bit
Right.
to the left of center or a little bit to the right of center. And I think that will probably be the outcome of 2016.
Okay, so regardless of how he's presenting himself, if Sanders doesn't shift a little more towards the middle, right, the essence of his politics are going to undermine him eventually. But Hillary, on the other hand, I'm going to get to the Republicans when we come back from the break.
Sure.
Hillary just needs to ride this out, not.
I think so. Unless there's something major that comes out, and again, it's still very, it's still very early. When we looked at 2012, Herman Cain. I know we're talking about but he was at the top of the heap for the Republicans.
For a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah. So it's still very early. But if I had to guess, I would think that Hillary, unless there's something catastrophic that happens, and she was also aided with one other thing.
Yes.
Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden had a terrible personal tragedy, which was real.
Yeah.
Okay? But I think he looked at the landscape and said, I don't think I could win this thing. And he's 72 years old, and
he didn't sound like he'd win it. He sounded weak. He sounded wishy-washy.
He can go out.
Yeah.
He can go out on top. And if you look at his history, he ran in 1988, and he had to withdraw because there was a politician's words that he borrowed, and he was not very effective in 2008.
Well, and as I recall, Susan Estrich leaked that information and had to
somebody did
run Dukakis's campaign, which is one of the reasons Dukakis lost. So it was,
somebody from the Dukakis. I think somebody.
It was Susan Estrich.
Was it? Yeah, from the Dukakis campaign.
But just quickly, one of the issues in studying rhetoric, right, is that your character, according to Aristotle, is your most important argument, right? So in spite of all of the criticisms of Hillary over the years, the fact that we've known her so long, and if somebody supports her at this point, it seems to me that her character is so well established that there probably isn't too much anybody can say at this point to cause her to lose ground with her supporters. And she's been hit with everything. And
it's something you said earlier, which I think is really true, because when you were talking about Bernie Sanders, you said, this is who he is. He's being true to his principles. And I think with the politicians, the candidates, they need to be who they are. If you will recall.
We're going to have to pick this up when we come back. Thank you. We will take a quick commercial break. The Calumet Roundtable will be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. My guest today is Dr. Dan Dunn. We're continuing our discussion on the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign. Dan, maybe the most entertaining group of candidates in my lifetime. Let's start with the two, I think, most entertaining of the group. Ben Carson, Donald Trump. What's Carson doing here? I mean, I get Trump's here because he's got the money and he has a TV personality. How does Carson show up on the top of some of these polls?
Well, I think what's happening with Carson is there is a group of people that he really feels, and he really connects with. And that group tends to be the evangelical group. And so, and that's a very important part of the Republican base. And he comes off as a very religious, honest man, and somebody that's a political outsider. And I don't know how long his campaign will last, but he will probably...
Yeah, because he's so far outside, right? How can you imagine him holding that office.
Well, when you look at the primaries, particularly with the Republicans,
Yeah.
the base, and the base tends to be more religious. They tend to be more conservative, and especially in Iowa, when you're going out to the Iowa caucuses, it's going to be it's February, it's freezing,
Yeah.
but his people will come out, and what they're doing is they're making the media the devil. The media is
Right.
unfair.
Oh, he went off in the media this week.
Yeah, because I guess there are some discrepancies with his story, more than one,
Yeah.
and he's saying that this is unfair, and he's made some outlandish statements regarding the pyramids. Regarding
what's the pyramid thing? Tell me.
He was stating that how the leaders used the pyramids that was incorrect. He made some statements about the.
It's only this year would we get pyramids into the presidential
Yeah, and you
campaign.
where's he coming from on that? You
Yeah.
know, and he said, what if people had guns during the Holocaust?
Oh, yeah.
So
I heard
it's
that, yeah.
some of these statements that are somewhat outrageous, but to the Republican base.
Yeah.
I mean, they have appeal, and
But I mean, that's a pretty uninformed base
yes.
if they think the Holocaust could have been prevented if more people had guns.
But part of it is these voters are angry. They're looking at the status quo, and they're not seeing, especially Reagan Democrats, blue collar workers. They've not seen their wages really go up. With the establishment politicians,
Right.
they're angry, and it may be too that sometimes you have an election where it's going to be a base election. I think the conservatives felt that John McCain was not a true believer. They felt that Romney was not a true believer, and sometimes when you're trying to run a candidate more to the middle of the stage, and you lose, sometimes your base says,
go back to
that's what happened.
But has he ever held a public office? Did he ever, run a company with 1,000 employees in it? I mean, is he?
No, he's has a phenomenal record.
I mean,
as
it's like
a surgeon.
I'm at the at the lumberyard, right? And I meet a plumber there, and he's a really nice guy, and I hire him to come back and do carpentry work, right? Because he's a nice guy. I mean, how can anyone imagine that somebody with his background? I mean, look at the difficulty that the Bushes had, right? As former. One as a former governor, right?
Yep.
Clinton as a former governor. Look at the difficulty they had managing this enormous federal government that we have. How are you going to put somebody whose credentials are, he was a doctor, that he was a brain surgeon in there? I mean,
well, he's a bright guy, but you're right. He doesn't have that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And he'll probably argue that, well, I'll surround myself with a core of advisors.
Well, we heard
That's
that.
the
We
same
heard that.
thing
Yeah.
that Trump, Trump says he gets all his information from the news media. He watches all the news shows. But the thing about the media that's really incredible, I mean, Trump is on all of these shows all the time. He's saying, I'm self-funding my campaign. I think he spent somewhere around $2 million. That's all, because he's getting all this free media. Right. And when he hosted Saturday Night Live last weekend, and there was concern.
There were some protests.
Right.
Yeah.
But Saturday Night Live had their highest ratings since 2012.
Wow.
So he sees himself as the one that is drawing these ratings, even with the debate.
Okay, so let's move to Trump then.
Okay.
So Trump is a media commodity.
Oh,
right?
Trump is, yes. Trump is a performer.
Yeah, and so he doesn't have to pay to get airtime. He's getting airtime anytime he'll make himself available, essentially, right?
Right. And what people, I mean, he's got a core that will never vote for him, okay?
Right.
But there's a core that like him because they think he's authentic. I mean, because
But this is like saying, Carson's a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and Trump's authentic. I mean, those are wonderful characteristics to have, but,
Right.
but does it qualify them to be president of the United States, to
No.
have their finger on the button?
No. But what happens is, if we go back to the media,
Yeah.
the media is going to highlight this drama. The big moment, there were two big moments from the last debate with the Republicans. The first one was when Ted Cruz stood up and said, I'm sick of these questions. These
Yeah.
are gotcha questions. You're
Right,
trying to get us to speak against each other, and we're not dealing with the issues. He becomes one of the big winners in the debate. And the second one was Marco Rubio.
Right.
Bush was challenging Rubio on his voting record,
Yeah.
and Rubio was prepared for that,
Yeah, he was.
and he won that exchange. And then most people are not like you and me, and we really follow this stuff.
Yeah.
People then pick this up in these sound bites that the news media gives us. I want to go back to 1988 if I could.
Okay.
To illustrate this point. In the debate that Lloyd Benson had with Dan Quayle, okay?
Classic moment.
Classic moment where, Quayle had been saying,
Comparing himself to
the
Kennedy all the
JFK,
time. All the time. Yeah.
I spent as many years in Congress, and Lloyd Benson was waiting for that because he'd been saying it on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
And Lloyd Benson looks at Dan Quayle and says, John F. Kennedy, I knew John F. Kennedy very well. John F. Kennedy was my friend. You are no JFK. And then Quayle, his face, you could see, he
was
felt
over.
scolded. The Republican Party then said, well, we'll let him speak in safe territories in high schools, and we'll let him take questions from junior high students.
Right.
And his image was cemented. So later on, when he, in a situation
There was
where
also a big search to turn up his transcripts from college.
that. And there also was the effort, because he had performed so badly when he was introduced,
Yeah.
that we would replace him, they would replace him, but they didn't want another Eagleton. But I will tell you, in the end, Quayle was good for Bush, because Quayle became the focus, and Dukakis became the focus in that campaign. Just like in 1968, Agnew was great for Nixon. He was great for Nixon because Nixon was able to stay above the fray,
Right.
and Agnew had said things like, he called this Japanese American that fat Jap. He said,
really?
Yeah. He said, if you've seen one slum, you've seen them all. And then a reporter asked him, I don't see a lot of diversity in your crowds. And he says, well, I don't look at a crowd and say, there's an Italian, there's a Greek, and then his language, there's a Polak. So he said offensive things.
Oh my gosh.
And so, but in the end, the focus was not on Nixon.
Right.
So, even though there were issues with Quayle, in my judgment, he was a good choice for Bush, because Bush had such image problems.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, he was a liability as well, but he also.
Because the gods, and
took some of the pressure
then Bush had the good fortune to run against Michael Dukakis, who
was
ran.
shooting himself in the foot every day, right?
Yes, he was.
Yes, yeah.
He said this campaign is about competence, not ideology. And then he spends a month not campaigning, doing his governor's work.
But it's because he lost Susan Estrich. But,
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's get back to Trump for a second, and then I want to talk about your history of predicting elections. All right.
I'm going to tell you the one I missed.
So the first issue, that we kind of talked about was that candidates need to present themselves well and take advantage of opportunities in order to get their message out. But at some point, who they are and what they stand for may decide the election. But if you've got people that are in close enough range with one another, then how they're coming across through the media may be the biggest factor, right?
Yeah. But you have to be authentic.
So if we look at Trump now, okay? Trump is saying things that are offensive, that are he's shooting from the hip. He's not looking. One of the things that I think of in other campaigns is candidates tried to look presidential, and that had something to do with kind of being slow to react, being thoughtful, being informed before they open their mouths. He's not doing any of that. So why is he topping the polls with Carson? How do you count for
It's
that?
it's that outsider view. It's that angry vote. If you look at his slogan, you see the word silent majority. He took that from Nixon.
Well, of course, yeah.
Nixon in his speech when he Vietnamized the Vietnam War,
Right.
then he called on this great silent majority.
Right.
Then he sent Agnew out, and Agnew became the sponsor.
And attack the media.
Attack the media.
Yeah.
So this attack on the media is
Yeah.
not just new.
So it plays well,
it plays very well.
and nobody cares that he's not acting presidential. None of his supporters, anyway.
None of his supporters. Now, it could become a different scene when you get to if he gets the nomination.
If he's running against somebody who doesn't look like one of the seven dwarfs, which is what that last debate looked like to me. But anyway, okay, so now Dan has a history of predicting outcomes, so we'd like to get his prediction here. I just want to point out that he has former students who call him. He hasn't heard from them sometimes in years, and they'll call him and say, okay, who's going to win this election? So give us your assessment. We got about 30 seconds here.
Okay, just 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you the one I blew. Okay. I think that if there is not a major foreign policy, a big foreign policy issue, and I don't think there will be. I think Obama's laid that out.
Okay.
I think Hillary Clinton will be our next president.
Okay, you heard it here, everybody. It's Hillary Clinton. Thank you, Dan. That's all
Thank
the
you
time
very
we have
much.
for our program. Thank you for joining us today on Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. Have a great day.